Yeah? Okay. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا إنه من يهديه الله فلا مضل له من يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. All right. So, after a brief pause, we'll do a long recap from the previous lesson, inshallah, and go into something new. So, last time we spoke about the Battle of the Confederates, or the Battle of Al-Ahzab or Al-Khandaq. This is the longest battle the Prophet fought in. It lasted for about 1 month. But despite the fact that it lasted for so long, there wasn't a lot of fighting. There was fighting, but much of the time was spent, the Muslims spent on sentry duty, watching the enemy on high alert, because the Muslims dug a trench around the city of Medina. So what happened, what led to this battle, of course, was the Jews, always the Jews. Well, a lot of the time. A delegation of 20 Jews from the tribe of Bani al-Nadir and Khaybar. So Bani al-Nadir was one of the tribes that lived in Medina itself and which was expelled from Medina because they had attempted to kill the Prophet, assassinate him. So one of the leaders was a man named Hayy ibn Akhtab, but a number of other people as well. They went around the Arabian Peninsula. They met up with leaders of the big tribes like Quraysh and Ghatafan, and convinced them to raise an army of 10,000 to go fight the Muslims with the intention of a final victory, destroying the Islamic nation and killing the Prophet. Muslims heard about this and they were trying to think, what's the best way to fight this enemy? So the Prophet held a meeting, Majlis Shura, and amongst the people present, the Sahaba, was Salman al-Farisi radiallahu anhu, who mentioned what they did back in his homeland, which was to dig a trench, a ditch, a big ditch between them and the enemy. The Muslims liked this idea because they knew that the army coming was 10,000. This was unprecedented. This was never before imagined in Arab history. So they accepted the idea and started working on it straight away. It took them about 15 days, or a little over 2 weeks, to dig a trench. That's the map of Medina and where they dug the trench. It's the blue line at the top, the round blue line there. So Medina is in the middle there. You've got a mountain with a lava field on the right and to the left, and to the south is Jabal Ayr. And the map shows you where the gaps were in the city's defenses. So the initial gap was here. So any army or anybody could walk into Medina from here, and the other gap was down here. But this was occupied by the Jewish tribe of Bani Qurayda, who had fortified this area, but they had entrances and gates and whatever. So they occupied this area, but this area here was nobody occupied it. So the Muslims decided to dig the trench here, which is the most likely place. If you have a big army of 10,000, this is the logical place for the army to come and invade Medina. Digging the trench. So the depth they dug, the trench was 5 meters, and the width 5 to 10 meters in terms of the width. The length from end to end, 12 kilometers. So this was very difficult digging, because not only was it a huge long trench, but the ground itself was not soft ground. It wasn't sandy, it was rocky ground. So modern day, you'd have to use special equipment to be able to dig hard ground. And the number of people they had digging wasn't 3,000, it was less than 3,000. So 3,000 was the total combined force of people, or even living in Medina. So 3,000 people included the people fighting, including women and children, but they all chipped in and helped out. And that in itself was the first miracle of the Ghazwat al-Ahzab, the trench. So normal circumstances, you would find it be very difficult, almost impossible for humans to be able to do that without special equipment. But through Allah's help, they managed to dig the entire trench in that time, in about 2 weeks. The Prophet ﷺ, himself, he participated in the digging of the trench. Now, but the other thing to remember is, at that time, in Medina, they were very hungry. They were almost maybe not famine levels, but there was little food to eat. So they're digging, and they were starving. And at the same time, of course, they were going through a very difficult economic period as well. But the Prophet himself, he participated, and this was a sign of good leadership, because a leader who participates with the people is one of the people. This is one way to support the people, by actually going and working with them, suffering amongst them. And this is what the Rasulullah did. And I gave the story of one person, one Sahabi, who had a little bit of food at his house, and he saw that the Prophet was starving, hungrier than anybody else. So he invited the Prophet to come and have dinner with him, with a small amount of food that he could share. So the Prophet, instead of going in secret or privately, just without telling anybody, he actually told as many people as he could to come and join him for dinner at this person's house. And the Prophet ended up coming with 1,000 people with him. So this Sahabi is worried why did the Prophet come with 1,000 people if he's only got food for only a couple of persons? But the Prophet showed that he knew what he was doing. He himself helped cook the food. He put the bread into the oven, and he helped cook the food. And Allah put the blessings, the barakah in the food. And all 1,000 people who came with him were able to eat well and fill their stomachs with a small amount of food. The Prophet, as I said, he didn't just sit at home praying and let everybody else work. He was there working amongst them. He also tried to raise people's morale by not exactly singing, but reciting poetry. So he didn't compose the poetry, but he recited poetry, and people would sort of repeat after him. And on top of that, there was one famous story of the big rock that was very difficult to break. They come across a big rock. The Prophet hit it 3 times, and each time the sparks would come off. The Prophet would say, I saw, it would prophesize the conquest of Persia and the Roman Empire and all that. And finally, the Ahzab army arrives. So the Ahzab is the big army, the Quraysh of Quraysh and the allies. And they arrive and they find this trench, something they had never seen before, because this was a Persian, what they did in Persia. So they said they couldn't, they found it difficult to cross the trench into Medina. Every now and then, somebody with a strong horse would be able to somehow jump over the trench, and there were a few people who managed to do that. But each time they did that, the Muslims fought back and either killed them or forced them back across the trench. So the situation didn't change much for about 4 weeks. The enemy army sitting outside Medina and the Muslims inside Medina. And as I mentioned before, Bani Qurayza, the last Jewish tribe. Before the Qurayshi army, the Ahzab army arrived, the Prophet got these last remaining Jews to confirm that the treaty, existing treaty they had with the Muslims. The treaty which included a pact of mutual defense. So they would support each other in warfare, in a war if an enemy came to invade Medina. So Bani Qurayza, the Jewish tribe, reaffirmed this treaty. But after 4 weeks of this Ahzab, the Battle of Ahzab, the army, the Ahzab army, was getting tired of this. It was 4 weeks sitting there doing nothing, hardly anything. So Huyay ibn Akhtab, the person who managed to convince this army to come and fight, he had the idea to go to Bani Qurayza and convince them to switch sides. So Bani Qurayza initially was, according to the treaty, helping the Muslims, so preventing anybody from invading. Huyay ibn Akhtab, who was the enemy of the Muslims, he went in and convinced Bani Qurayza to switch sides, to help the enemy army come in to Medina. The Prophet heard the news, and he realized what he was trying to think of ways of splitting the army, how to break this army. At first, he tried to convince one of the tribes, Bani Ghatafan, who contributed people to the army, to withdraw their people. But that plan didn't work out. So, what happened then? Another person approached the Prophet, Nu'aym ibn Mas'ud. Nu'aym ibn Mas'ud was from Ghatafan, that army, who had contributed to the army. Nu'aym ibn Mas'ud had converted to Islam and kept his conversion to a complete secret. Hardly anybody knew about it. And he went to speak with the Prophet himself and ask him how he could help. The Prophet didn't give him an answer. But so what did Nu'aym ibn Mas'ud do? He went to Bani Qurayza. He first approached Bani Qurayza. As I said, his conversion to Islam was a secret. So everybody thought he was from Bani Ghatafan. He was not a non-Muslim. He was from Bani Ghatafan. He was with the army that came to invade. So Nu'aym went to Bani Qurayza and said to them that if the Muslims are able to hold out, this Ahzab army is going to withdraw. They're going to go home. And because they've switched sides, the Muslims will turn against them, fight them, and maybe kill them. So he advised Bani Qurayza to demand from the Ahzab army to send hostages, to force the Ahzab army to stay and fight. So Bani Qurayza thought this is a good idea. He then went to the Quraysh, the leaders of Quraysh, the Quraysh in the army, and said to them that Bani Qurayza are thinking of switching sides. They regret what they did because originally they had the treaty with the Muslims, and then they changed their minds. So they're going to ask you to send hostages. And with those hostages, they're going to hand them over to the Muslims because they now want to fix the relationship that they had with the Muslims. They had broken the treaty. So Nu'aym ibn Mas'ud went to Quraysh and then went to Ghatafan and said the same thing. Soon, the Ahzab army sent a delegation to Bani Qurayza, and Bani Qurayza demanded from them hostages, just as Nu'aym ibn Mas'ud had said. It was at that point that the alliance between the Jews and the Ahzab army broke. Because as Nu'aym said to them, to the Qurayshis and the Ahzab army, he said that they will demand hostages, the Jews will demand hostages, and then hand them over to the Muslims. It was around this time, not only that was the army, the alliance between them, the two break, Allah sent a storm, a huge storm. With very strong wind. The wind blew away their tents and they spilled their cooking pots, and the weather turned very cold. And at that point, after 4 weeks, they finally gave up. They said that there's no point, and they went home. The whole army withdrew. And the other thing, there were angels. I don't know how they supported the Muslims, but they were there. We know that because Jibreel appeared to the Prophet Muhammad soon afterwards and tell the Prophet to go fight Bani Qurayza. So after 1 month, the battle ended. But the next day, I believe it was the next day, Jibreel appeared to the Prophet, tell him to go fight Bani Qurayza. So the Muslims, instead of resting now after 4 weeks, they had to get up and go and fight Bani Qurayza. And they laid siege to Bani Qurayza, which lasted 25 days. When finally, at the end, Allah sent fear and terror in the hearts of the Bani Qurayza, and they surrendered. Despite the fact that they had built a powerful fortification and they were well stocked with food and everything they needed, they could have gone on for much longer. And that there was the verdict on what to do with them was finally execution, to execute all the men. And the women and children taken as slaves. And I also mentioned the daughter of Hayy ibn Akhtab. Anybody remember? No? So that was Seerah Safiyyah radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet, al-Mu'mineen. And finally, a quick analysis. So, was this justice for Bani Qurayza? So, as I mentioned, the verdict on Bani Qurayza was execution, executing all the men, and the women and children taken as slaves, and all the property taken by the Muslims. And yes, justice. It was justice because Bani Qurayza has broken the treaty. There was that trust between the Muslims and the Jews that had been broken. And they put lives of all the Muslims in Medina in danger. They were ready to let the enemy army in to Medina to destroy Islam, kill everybody and destroy Islam. And there's the famous incomplete hadith is Al-an naghzum la yaghzuna nahnu nasiru alayhim. This was what the Prophet said after the Ahzab army left. Meaning, up until that point, Quraysh had been on the offensive, always attacking, always sending troops, armies to north to Medina. Now, this was the turning point. The Muslim power was now going to increase, and the Muslims now be on the offensive instead of Quraysh being on the offensive. So, what happened after Al-Ahzab and Bani Qurayza? The Prophet sent out, for the next few months, the Prophet would send out small forces here and there, either to punish the tribes that had assisted the Ahzab army or contributed to the Ahzab army, or were thinking of attacking the Muslims. And one tribe, the tribe was the tribe of Bani Bakr bin Ibn Kilab. They sent people to join the Ahzab army. The Prophet sent a force to punish them. Now, the force that went to punish this Ahzab army, this tribe of Bani Bakr, on the way back, they captured a man he was on his way to Medina. He was in disguise. They captured him and took him, the man named Thumama ibn Uthal. It's very important name to remember. Now that he had disguised himself with the intention of going all the way to Medina to assassinate, to kill the Prophet. He was the head of his tribe of Bani Hanifa. So they brought him, this man, Thumama, in front of the Prophet. And the Prophet knew what what his intentions were, and asked him, what do you want to do? Or what do you think of the situation you're in now? So Thumama said to him, replied to the Prophet, there were three options. Either, he said to the Prophet, if he is killed, his tribe would get revenge for him getting killed. The second option was that the Muslims would release him without ransom, just let him go. And the third option was to be released for a ransom. And he was a very wealthy man. Now, the Prophet didn't give him a reply, but he kept him tied up inside the Prophet's mosque for 3 days. And each day he would come, and the Prophet would come and speak to him, ask him have the same conversation with him. And at the same time, Thumama would be in the mosque and he'd be observing the Muslims. As they came to the mosque to pray, he would observe the Prophet, how the Muslims lived. And at the end of 3 days, the Prophet decided to release him without ransom. He released him. Thumama exited the mosque, and went somewhere. He bathed, he cleaned his body, he made his ghusl, came back to the Prophet and converted to Islam. This was the same person who had only a few days earlier come with the intention of killing the Prophet. And he did it in this order on purpose. He didn't want to convert while he was a captive of the Muslims. Then people would say that he was forced to convert. So he waited for him to be released as a free man, and as a free man he would come back to the Prophet and convert to Islam. After he converted, he asked the Prophet, he said he was intended to go to Umrah in Mecca after he killed the Prophet. So he got the Prophet's permission to go do Umrah. The Prophet gave him the permission, so Thumama went all the way to Mecca to do Umrah. And as I said, Thumama was an important person. He was the leader of his tribe, Bani Hanifa. And they were very wealthy. He not only did Umrah, he went to the leaders of Mecca and said to them, I will boycott you, and I'll prevent any goods coming to you, any food, whatever, coming to you. And he did as he said to them. He boycotted Mecca, and Mecca suffered so much from this boycott that they had to send a delegation all the way to Medina to speak to the Prophet to order Thumama to lift the boycott on them, on Mecca. So after Khandaq, the Muslim power was only increasing. The prestige and power of the Muslims would increase day by day, pretty much. The Prophet marched out of Medina. Again, another tribe, Bani al-Ahyan, was creating problems. And they were the same tribe that only a year or so previously had requested the Prophet to send teachers to teach them about Islam. And instead of welcoming these teachers, they slaughtered them. So they had to be punished for this act of treachery. So the Muslims went out, and when they arrived at the location, they found the tribe had all run away instead of fighting the Muslims. For the next four armies the Prophet sent out were under the leadership of Zayd ibn Haritha. So he would send Zayd ibn Haritha with a force to punish one tribe. He would come back and send him off to another one. And these were long distances away. So Zayd ibn Haritha, it was like the Prophet was preparing Zayd ibn Haritha for something big, giving him that experience in warfare. Another campaign, oh yes, so this was another tribe that lived 800 kilometers north of Medina. The Prophet sent a force, 500 strong, and leadership of Zayd ibn Haritha to punish the tribe, and they managed to defeat them. But this was a huge distance away, 800 kilometers. But this campaign, because they went so far away out of Medina, and increased the prestige of the Muslims throughout the Arabian Peninsula. And one other person was Al-Yusayr ibn Rizam. So he was one of the Jewish leaders who had helped organize the Ahzab army. He was hiding in Khaybar. Prophet sent Abdullah ibn Rawaha, the Sahabi ibn Rawaha, to assassinate him. Because not only had he organized the Ahzab army, he was trying to do the same thing again, raise a new army. So he had to be put out of the picture. Bani Mustaliq. Again, the Prophet marched out to punish the tribe of Bani Mustaliq that were preparing to attack Medina. This was an important campaign. Number one, yes, they fought against Bani Mustaliq. They had a victory, and they took captives. Amongst them was Juwayra bint al-Harith, the future wife of the Prophet, radiallahu anha. And yes, so after the Muslims defeated them, they took them as captives. But because the Prophet had married one of them, Juwayra bint al-Harith, the Muslims released the other captives. They said the tribe is related to the wife of the Prophet. We can't keep them as captives. On the way back from this campaign of Bani Mustaliq, there are some problems, big problems. Now, the first one, I won't go by this order. The first one was a quarrel between the Muhajirun and Ansar. So the Muhajirun and Ansar had people in the army, and they started to quarrel over a well. This was one problem. The Prophet managed to sort out the problem between them. The second problem that arose was Abdullah ibn Ubay, so one of the hypocrites of Medina. He was in the army. On the way, because as they were returning, he said that, and this is, Allah sent down the verse in the Quran, the honorable would definitely expel the inferior. So he was talking about himself, saying he was more honorable than the Prophet. And when they arrived in Medina, they would expel the Prophet from Medina. And Allah recorded this in the Quran, in Surah Al-Munafiqun. The last issue that arose from this was the necklace, or the ifk incident. Hadith al-ifk. So this was because the wife of the Prophet, Sayyidah Aisha, also went out with the army, accompanied the Prophet. And on the way back, she separated from the army to look for a necklace. And she was some distance away. And when she came back to where the army was, she found that everybody had left, except for one Sahabi. So this Sahabi accompanied Sayyidah Aisha all the way back to Medina, and this was when people started, especially I think the hypocrites, I believe, started the rumor that Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet, had committed the haram, zina, and committed adultery. And this was a big problem, a huge crisis that lasted, I think, maybe a month. The Prophet separated himself from Sayyidah Aisha until finally Allah sent down verses from the Quran to confirm her innocence. And this was typical as Muslim power increased, and the hypocrites would cause more and more trouble. So in all, the 6th year of the Hijrah, after Ahzab, there were 20 campaigns, 17 led by Sahabis and 3 led by the Prophet, a number of them led by Zayd ibn Haritha radiallahu anhu. But these campaigns were had a big effect. Going through the list here. Improvement of security and safety of the Muslims. So establishing Muslim power and establishing respect for the Muslim state throughout the Arabian Peninsula. Also increased the military capability of the Muslims. Muslim power increased. They had new people converting to Islam, more allies. Economic situation of the Muslims as well. They established new connections, new trade routes with other tribes. Diplomatic representation throughout the Arabian Peninsula. At the same time, decrease in Quraysh's prestige. So Quraysh had been defeated at the Ahzab, the Battle of Ahzab, and the more and more tribes were changing sides, allying themselves with the Muslims, even converting to Islam. Decrease in the activity of the Medinan hypocrites. I said before that they started creating trouble. They actually, for a while, the activities started to decrease as Muslims started to assert themselves throughout the Arabian Peninsula. At the same time, the Jews also lost a lot of power. The Prophet expelled two tribes out of Medina. The third tribe where the men were executed, and these Jewish tribes were very powerful. Not anybody could just fight them. When the Muslims had been able to defeat them, establish control over them. And the last benefit of these 20 campaigns was that the news of the existence of the new Islamic nation spread beyond the Arabian Peninsula. So people from other nations heard about this new Muslim state. So, Treaty of Hudaybiyah now is coming up. We'll talk about that next time. Yes. That was just a map I put in from, that's where Medina is, and at the top is Khaybar. 174 kilometers. So, before the Muslims went to fight at Khaybar, the Prophet sent Abdullah ibn Rawaha all the way to Khaybar to assassinate one of their important leaders. Khaybar was where the Jews were now concentrated. They were no longer in Medina. In Khaybar was a series of fortifications. It wasn't just one fortification, it was a number of fortifications. And the Jews had a community there. They had agriculture, they had forts, they had commerce. It was a very powerful center of Jewish life. Inshallah, that's all I had for tonight. Any questions, any comments from anybody? Or? No? سبحان الله وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Thank you very much.